Welcome to AOL. Welcome to AOL Underground.
Would you please state your handle and the years you were active on AOL?
So I'm Keeb. I was active from early 90s to probably just after 2000 or so.
Nice. When did you first use a computer?
Probably five, around there. I was on a Tandy 386 that was running DOS, playing games like golf and Reader Rabbit. Yeah, I was fortunate. I think I basically grew up with Nintendo and a computer in my room. And so I split my time evenly between both of them.
Nice, that's great. Do you remember the first time you got on AOL?
Yep. 5th grade. My handle then was Leplik, like Leplik. Thought that was so cool because I'm short. People used to call me the little leprechaun. And so 5th grade me thought that name was really cool. My parents were on vacation. They were vehemently against the internet, even though they had no idea what the internet was. My aunt was watching over us. And my parents, in their great wisdom, left a whole bunch of blank checks. And we had decided, hey, we'll use one of those blank checks to sign up for AOL service while the parents are away. So my older brother and sister, obviously took first pass. When my parents got back, they were really pissed off, but I guess they didn't know how to cancel it. So we, the cat was out of the bag, and that was the beginning for sure.
Awesome. Did you have one phone line or two phone lines?
2 phone lines. Yeah, my parents had a business, and so the second phone line, I think, from then on was dedicated to AOL for sure.
That was certainly key at the time.
Yeah, luckily. I remember later in life getting screamed at by my parents because we had one phone line at a house we were in, and I was hogging it all day. And like one of my parents was out and needed to talk to us and couldn't get through. Funny the things you remember.
I think we've all been screamed at by our parents for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So how did you find the scene?
So I think there's like 2 iconic finding the scene moments, right? One is you're in a public chat room somewhere and someone scrolls something, right? Like some macro, usually like the middle finger, famous macro or something like that. And you're like, cool. How did that happen? So it was either that or I got punted offline, and it was like, well, how do I do that? And so then you just ask around, I guess. I don't know. I don't remember like who it was or how, but I know it was one of those 2 things for sure.
Nice. And do you remember like what some of the first programs you used were?
Yeah, FadeX 2.5, I guess, or something like that. I was thinking about like, okay, how do I use this? And then some dude told me to decompile it. And here I am on Windows 3.1. I don't have VB3. Someone sends me over AOL email, like all of the tools needed to decompile this new Fate program that I just received. And I remember doing that and it cascading hundreds of forms, like VB3 forms everywhere. And I was like, nope. And, didn't really touch it for a while after that.
But then you came back to it.
I did.
Right?
Yeah.
So can you tell me about that?
Yeah, it was weird. So Windows 3.1's gone. Now we're in the new era of Windows 95 and VB4. And I was in one of the like prog channels, somewhere and messing around with like different proggies or whatever. And someone asked like, how do I use VB? And I was like, what do you mean? You use it like any other prog, you load it up and you click some buttons and they're like, okay, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. And so I was like, okay, well, I guess I need to go and figure out, oh yeah, I think I remember that VB3 thing. Like how hard could it be? And so that's kind of how I got into it. No real reason other than, how hard could it be?
Right. And then how hard was it?
Well, I think there's like different classes of difficulty, right? Like when you take someone else's code and you decompile it or something like that, and maybe use someone else's chat send function to like send some text to a room, like that. That's for me. That wasn't so hard, right? The hard part was, well, how do you make your own chat send function? I was really very fascinated with the mechanics of the how versus the end product, if you will. Like how does this actually work? Like I don't know if you remember in the early days, like right when AOL was adding rich text to the chat rooms, you could create a lagger. Do you remember laggers?
Yeah. Well, I didn't know about them at the time, but I learned about them recently, and they're pretty crazy.
Yeah, and so I was like so curious, like how the hell does a lagger work, right? And so anyway, like that was the interesting part to me, was solving the puzzle of how does this actually work at the end of the day. And so yeah, like getting into it was super simple, and then obviously you can do anything. It's a computer, and so finding out how it's done was the exciting part, and that's a lot more difficult.
Nice. Did you collaborate with anybody?
Yeah, there was like a little clique of people. I think, the main room I hung out in was VV4, I think for a very long time, private room VV4. And a lot of people came and went from that place. But mainly there's people like Raw and Ashley and Igneous and Mr. Chi-Chi's and a whole bunch of people. Those are the ones, Ghost. Those are the ones that come to the top of mind. And then there was like the famous scene people that you kind of heard about, but you didn't really know where they hung out. Dolan and DOS and those people. And so yeah, it was really interesting to kind of like have the people you hung out with, and then have the people that are quote unquote known and kind of like pushing the frontier of this stuff, or being called hackers or whatever.
Wait, are you saying that they also hung out in the same chat room? Those other people? They weren't like in your crew or whatever, your buddies?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was weird to see that. Even today, there's two progs that like really bring you back, right? This like AOL or FadeX, one of those two. If you were in the AOL scene around that time, like you kind of know of those two, And then there's like other ones that came later, like MIB or whatever, that I think popularized the playing a little snippet of sound as your prog loaded, right?
Yeah, everybody, everybody had a sweet song.
Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned DOS. Are you talking about like the guy that made the DOS32.bas file?
Yeah, yeah, and then made the first OCX for chat comms, right? And I remember loading that for the first time, and then like not realizing how to use it inside of VB for the longest time. And then I was like, oh, you double click on this thing that's not shown on your form, and that's how you start programming the CCOM. So yeah, he was definitely a big inspiration for me, because you could always look at his code and A, know that it worked, and B, like use it as a foundation for building whatever you had in your mind to build, right?
Did he release his OCX code?
I don't know how I got the OCX. I want to say any VB program like brings it along with it, brings the OCX along with it, and so importing an OCX from another VB program at the time was straightforward. So maybe I did it that way.
Okay.
I don't necessarily remember how. And like at that time, I think this was really the frontier, at least for me, thinking back, like the frontier of open source programming and sharing, and yeah, like code sharing. I mean, what was really cool about the scene then was you come up with some novel idea, or some new function or some new button on your form or whatever, and then not only do you like flex and show it in the chat room, but then you also like along with that send the code so that other people can innovate. to me, this like BAS files and sharing them, was the beginning of my long love for open source programming, which is still what I spend a lot of my time doing today.
Awesome. So it kind of laid the foundation.
Yeah.
Once you got the BAS files and started screwing around, did you release any programs or BAS files of your own?
Yeah. Well, one of the ways we met is actually you found one of my BAS files that I actually released. I made a whole bunch of different stuff from, generic like FadeX clones to, purpose-built stuff. When CComs came out, I made MP3 players and I made faders and what's it called? AIM came out and made multi-account AIM programs and built spammers and name collectors. And then what's funny is after you have your AIM collector, your screen name collector, crawling all of the public rooms all night, you collect hundreds of thousands of names. And then you have to do things like, well, how do you dedupe such a large list? On such a low powered machines like we had, then. And so it, takes you into computer science fundamentals pretty quickly, right? Like once you have challenges that extend outside of the scope of sending some text to random windows on a Windows PC.
Oh, that's really interesting. You had to think about efficiency of the code at that point.
Yeah, it's funny to read you sent me my BAS file, and actually like the first thing I did was open it up and start reading through the code, and I'm like, oh my God, not remembering I was 12 when I wrote it, but like, wow, like super embarrassed. Found some typos, definitely found some bugs. I'm like, oh wow, I wish I knew then what I know now. Could have done a lot better.
It's so true. But if you think about it, like even like a junior developer, right, that joins an organization and you look at their code and you're like, wow, this is really bad. But if you're looking back to your old .bas file, right? I mean, everybody starts somewhere, right?
True. And like taste changes and grows, and like people evolve, and I'm still like I'm still embarrassed by the code I wrote last week. So like I think that's a constant struggle, for anyone who's writing something, is it makes so much sense at the time that you wrote it, and then with some distance, then you're like, oh, I could have done X, Y, and Z better.
That's so true. Yeah, I go through my own GitHub repository and I'm like, wow, that's really not good code.
Yeah.
Cool. So the different things, you said you made some CComs, the name collectors and the spammers. So was the point of the name collectors to do the spamming?
Yeah. I mean, there's the whole like dark side of all of this, right? Like where, phishing was a big thing, cracking like cool names. Some of the early like tame spamming I did was so one thing that's common about operator accounts on AOL is that even if you have your IMs off, then an operator can IM you back. Like whereas if your friends try to IM you, it will say, like this person has IMs disabled or something. But if you send a host a message, then they can respond. So one of the first collectors I built was to spam just like some random message to every single person on that list to try to find operator accounts. And, like I'm like a dog chasing a car. Like I had no idea, what I was going to do once I found one of these accounts, but I found a few. But yeah, like that was the intro to that. And then obviously then it's make a weird name, usually under someone else's master account, and spam out like, hey, something's wrong with your password, respond with your password. And so for a long time I made stuff to do stuff like that, basically.
And so was it just for the fun of writing your own instead of using other people's?
For me, it's how is it actually done. A lot of the code that I wrote was just to see if I could actually do it.
Did you release any of your programs?
I don't know. I remember, I want to say yes, but like who knew of them, and were they used by anyone other than me or not? I don't know. But most of the stuff I built for myself, and to show how to do something or something like that. If I did release anything, it was like contained basically to the VB4 room.
Oh, okay. But somehow the BAS file made it, right, to 2022. So I'm wondering if anything else made it to 2022.
I'm hoping, like, that would be cool. I remember like the last program I worked on was called Keebs Cookies. That was mostly an exercise in like how to do interesting interfaces, or iFaces as we called them then, mixing in transparency and pictures and whatnot, like inspired by those old cracking progs. Like you download some proprietary software and there's a crack that comes along with it, like with cool music and whatnot. And what was also interesting about those cracks is the shape of the program on your desktop, was typically not a box. It was like some weird shape or something like that. Yeah, my last like AOL focused program was exploring, how to do that.
And what version of VB was that in?
6, I want to say. Yeah. I remember the when VB7 was released and thinking, oh man, this is like so foreign from VB6, or maybe it was VB5 to VB6 or something like that. I think it was VB6 to VB7. And so, yeah, like my journey with VB ends, I think, in VB6.
Interesting. I didn't know there was a Visual Basic 7. Did it go from...
I think it went from VB6 to VB7, and then that was renamed to like VB.net.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Because I remember I was programming VB6, and then like I came back years later. I'm like, what is this .NET thing? And I'm like, where's VB6?
Yeah.
I don't want to use .NET.
Yeah.
Like, I want to use VB6.
Exactly. And so yeah, I remember trying to buy VB5 and asking like the person at Best Buy or whatever, like, this says VB5 Education Edition, and this other one's Pro Edition, and it's like $200 difference in price. And I was like, if I make an EXE on the education version, can I send it to people and can they use it? And the poor like Best Buy person was like, I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. So anyway.
That's funny. At least they didn't make up an answer. That's always the worst, when the person at Best Buy makes up one.
Yeah. They're like, yeah, maybe. I don't know. Anyway.
So Keebs Cookies, I do remember the crackers, and they were some of the most phenomenal graphics I'd ever seen. It'd be like an intro animation or something to the cracker, and they'd have super sweet like MIDI music in the background, and those were so cool. And the EXE was always so small. I was like, how did you do
that? Yeah. Like, that's an instant nostalgia hit, is to turn on some chiptunes on Spotify or something like that, or on YouTube, and you're like, yeah, okay, this takes me back for sure.
Some stuff I did, I have like a label, and then you hover over the label and it changes color to like make like a button and stuff like that. Do you remember what kind of stuff you were doing with Keebs Cookies?
So the idea was like a circle, right? So it was like a big chocolate chip cookie or something like that, and then different labels on the cookie, would load up. At that time, it was cool to, not have like a file menu, but to have a label which loaded a menu, that you could then select or something like that. And so the concept was built around that, like click different parts of the cookie and you get different functions inside of the app. And the thing that was cool was it was a circle instead of a square, basically.
Interesting. Was the idea at all derived from the 1995 movie Hackers with the Cookie Monster virus?
No. No, I don't think I watched the Hackers movie until I was older, actually. It came from, there was a girl had decided to call me her Keebler, and then she's like, oh, that's too long. So then, she called me Keeb for short, and that's like where the name came from. And then Keebs Cookies was like a take on Keebler Cookies, which is a brand of cookies in the US.
Those were very good cookies.
Yeah. And so to this day, I like name machines. Like one of my machine names is like Treehouse or something. It's an homage to those days. And I've like my handle anywhere has been Keeb, like basically forever, since 5th grade. After the Leplik scenario, like I quickly fixed that.
Interesting. That's so funny. So she's like, I don't feel like typing Keebler all the time. We'll just make it Keeb. And you're like, okay.
Yeah. So, funny how like small moments like that, I still remember. I was like out on the playground in the jungle gym where that happened.
Oh, it was in real life. It wasn't in a chat room. Okay.
No, it was in real life. Yeah, like a schoolmate of mine. It's funny how little moments like that like have such a, I don't know, profound impact.
Yeah, definitely. So with the spamming, you said it started out where it was kind of more innocent, and then did it turn into something else?
Yeah, I mean, high school was interesting. Two things, seventh, eighth grade into high school was the rise of pornography on the internet for sure. And so I had a CD burner really, really young. And so, like, you'd download porn or whatever and then put it on a CD and sell those at school. I thought that was better than selling drugs. Still wanted to be an entrepreneur, but not on the drug side. And so one of my friends and I had a little cabal going of either music or porn stuff. And sometimes people would ask for like AOL accounts or something like that. And I would sell that to them, like cracked AOL accounts or whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, I quickly built a little enterprise, some of these programs that I had built for sure. A lot of this doesn't hold a candle to some of the stuff that some of my friends did, like sniffing out public SMTP gateways so that they could, affiliate marketing was big, then getting people to sign up and click on, links for boner pills or whatever, and they were making like real money doing that. I was making lunch money while they were making real money. And so I was really at the periphery of all of this, but certainly saw it all happening for sure.
Interesting. So you saw your friends doing some of that, and then was that just too much risk for you, or what?
I remember the first time I made an actual phishing website. So AOL used to have this ability to make websites within the AOL UI. And one of the things you could do was copy their sign up page or whatever. And when you click like the submit button, instead of it, like going to a different page or something like that, you could have it in the background. Like you could construct a mail to link so that it actually sent the email behind the window without like anyone noticing. And so you could do password phishing and you could do credit card phishing that way really easily. If you had enough names and there was not enough education at the time where you could get people to go to that page, they would enter their details and you would get their info. And so one thing that's true about me is I always tell people like what I'm doing and what's going on. And I tend to tell on myself a lot. So one day I was talking to my dad and I was telling my dad like, hey, like I built this thing and my friends are building this thing. And, it's like really easy to get people's credit card information this way. And he was like, well, it's cool that you know how to do that, but you're not like actually doing that. Right. And I was like, And so, like I knew it was wrong the whole time, but like just being confronted with it that way and having to vocalize it, I think that was kind of the end of to me, there's a line between getting someone's credit card information. And I didn't ever actually like buy anything with it or anything like that. It was cool to have them. There was a line between that and getting a master account on AOL to go and make someone else's account. I don't know what that line is or how I rationalize that away, but most of the time I did it because I wanted to see how it worked. That was kind of like the beginning and end of that, really, I think.
Interesting. So can we talk about this creating a website with AOL UI? I'm really interested in this. I've never heard of it. So is it like,
oh, really?
Yeah. So wait, is it hosted at AOL?
Yes.
Is it a fully qualified domain name with like a path specifically for you? Is it HTML or is it something else? I have a million questions.
Yeah, like the details are, they're there, but they're hazy. Like I have some memories about it. So this is like, I want to say it's before the rise of like Alta Vista and GeoCities and all of that stuff. So AOL had like a profile system, right? Where, everyone had a profile or everyone could have a profile and you could right click on someone's name and you could see their profile. As an aside, one of the cool things to do was adding fields to your profile or something like that. And we can talk about that.
Like fields that shouldn't be there, like extra fields?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's how, people learned about shift enter, like in a normal text box, if you press shift enter, then that will create a new line in the same way that if you have like an enter button in a multi-text file or multi-text box, it would create a new line. So shift enter does the same thing. And so then you could, shift enter and make another field. Anyway, so then there was a link like from your profile to a web page, basically, that you could author inside of the AOL app. And then there was a way to link to it. I don't really remember how to link to it, like how you link to it, what the domain name it was in, if it was published to the web or not, or if it was just published, inside of AOL or whatever. But yeah, like, back then, animated images and really thick section separators and some sound if you could have it, and pop-up boxes and shit. That was like all of the features. Those were all like basics that you needed on your website.
Was it like a WYSIWYG editor?
Yeah, it was drag and drop. I want to say it came in like AOL 4, like along with their, rich text, when you could start adding colors to your text and stuff like that.
Okay. Why would you have someone sign in if you're already on AOL? Like, what would they be signing into? Like, what is a legitimate reason for that?
You would send them a message and be like, hey, there's a problem with your account. You got to come here and enter your password to verify it's you. Or, hey, there's a problem with billing. You got to come here and enter your billing information again to make sure that you continue to have access to AOL or whatever, right?
Right. But you said you could copy their sign-up page, right? So, like, where would you get the sign-up page to copy?
Yeah, like AOL's sign-up page, you could copy it, and then, just instead of having it submit to AOL, you could have it as a mail to link that would just mail to you with all of the form data, and it would send an email like to whoever, to me or to another account or whatever.
So that code, the login page, so is that like from a web page? You would just copy that and then paste it in to the WYSIWYG? But then the mail to, I thought mail to would just like open up a compose email or something and not actually send it. But you're saying that there was a way to make it actually send it?
Yes.
Huh. You have to wonder if this was like generating like FDO code or something on.
No, it was like a button, like a simple mail to, but you could add in, like mail to, email address, question mark, subject, equals whatever, and it would fill out the subject, and message equals whatever, and it would fill out the message. And then there was like an ampersand send or something like that where it would actually send it.
I wonder if that's part of like the RFC.
It's definitely not. It's definitely not. But like, I think it's because it was all integrated into AOL, and there was like clearly a walled garden aspect here. Like, for some reason, their mail client just sent it.
Wow. Why would you do that? I wonder what they were thinking. That's crazy. So could you see the raw HTML under it? Or you could modify like a specific button to do something like a mail to, but you couldn't see the rest of it.
I'm still. This is the part where like I just have flashes of like doing some WYSIWYG stuff, and I'm thinking like, okay, well, like how did you do marquee text? Did you actually enter the marquee tag, or did you do that in the WYSIWYG thing? I don't remember.
Interesting. I'm sure somebody will let us know, and I'll put it in the show notes. There's probably a video on it or something. We could probably guess all day, but that sounds really interesting. I certainly remember using things like Blink when I was doing regular HTML programming, and I thought that was great. But I think I tried it recently, and it like totally didn't work. And I was like, "What happened to Blink?"
Yeah, now you got to do some JavaScript concoction to do that, right? Or maybe there's some CSS, animation trick you could do to make that happen. I don't know.
Right. Why did you end up leaving AOL?
I don't know. So one of the last projects I worked on, like Keebs Cookies and an MP3 player. And the cool thing about the MP3 player that I made was that it worked in any window, not just the AOL window. So it was like a CCOM that you could make work in any text editor. And so one of the first things that I did was use it in IRC, like trying to bring the AOL culture to some of the IRC channels that I was in.
How was that received?
That annoyed the shit out of people.
That's so funny.
They were like, yeah, don't bring that shit here, like don't do that. And so, but I was like, hey, like I can control my little music player from here. And they're like, yeah, we don't want to see that shit. Like, don't do that. Send yourself system messages or something like that if you want to do that.
That's really funny.
Yeah, and I actually, for college credit, was taking a nighttime VB programming class, which was hilarious because, like I'm in there at 14 years old or 15 years old with a whole bunch of adults in their 30s, and they're looking at me like, what the hell is this kid doing here? But they quickly found out I knew what I was talking about. And actually the teacher had me, helping him teach the class and helping the other people in the class. And so my final project, and everyone's final project, was to make something, using all of the stuff that you learn in class. And I showed the MP3 player that I made that could work anywhere. And I think that's kind of the last real VB project, actually, in particular, and the last AOL program, or I should say AOL related program that I wrote.
So it can work anywhere. Does that mean you had to find the parent window of every window that was open on your system and then just start subclassing everything and constantly checking every single window for the text? And then at what interval?
It was a little bit different, but similar concept. So when the program loaded, it would be pick the window. And I didn't know how to click on a button and then click on the text box and have it do it that way. So what I ended up doing was creating a key combination. That key combination was Alt-Enter. And so if you pressed Alt-Enter with the form highlighted with your mouse over the text box that you wanted to use, then that would be the window where it would pull the text to be the CCOM, basically. And so I did all of the local programming in Notepad, right? So I would load the program, I'd load Notepad, I'd highlight the thing, I'd mouse over the Notepad window, and I'd Alt-Enter, and then I could enter CCOM commands inside of Notepad, and it would, read it, and then it would erase it, and then put in the response. If I'm play Metallica, then it would, say okay, here's your 15 Metallica songs. Now enter a number, for the song that you want to play, and then you'd hit 3, and it'd play, whatever Metallica song number 3 was. And the whole UI was basically inside of Notepad at this point. And it would handle it all. It would, as you started to type, it would remove the other stuff, and it would, as soon as you hit enter, that was the key. That was the cue to, read whatever your input was.
That's pretty cool. So it's kind of you had your own personal shell anywhere, and with a bunch of alias functions, like a bash alias, right? But it could be in any window.
Exactly. And what was funny, is you start to think about this, and you said the magic word shell, right? And so after I was done with VB class, I took intro to Linux, at another night class at the local college. And I was like, okay, this is a lot like CCOMs look a lot like all of these bash commands that I'm starting to learn. And so, the motion from, using a CCOM to using a shell was really fluid for me.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really cool. Because DOS, you're just kind of calling binaries and stuff with a few arguments, but the actual CCOM calling a function, it's a little bit different. So
it's something about having music playing versus, just some text, I think made it interesting. Made it more interesting.
So you got some of these credits, and this is when you were in high school, or what?
Yeah. No. When I was in grade school.
Wow. So did your parents just recognize that you had talent and sent you, or did you ask for it, or how'd you end up there?
I asked for it. My parents owned a business growing up, and they had a rule, basically. They're like, listen, you're either going to be busy working at our business, and they worked in construction. And for me, spending the time outside doing shit, working on trucks or pulling weeds or landscaping or whatever was the worst idea ever. So they're like, you can either do that, or you're going to find a way to keep yourself busy. And so programming was definitely one of those things. And, they said that the if you choose it, we'll fund it, basically, as long as you're passionate about it. And so, I told them I want to take a programming class at the local college. And they said, if you can get into it, then great. And so I did.
That's really cool. Do you apply that to your own kids too, or not?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. I give my kids a lot of agency in what they do with their day, but the twist that I added is there's stuff that you have to do and there's stuff that you want to do, and the stuff that you want to do can only happen after you do the stuff that you have to do, like chores and whatnot. And so, building that structure, I think, is really helpful. It gets everyone what they want, like got to do homework. And as a result of doing homework, you get good grades. And then, it's not up to me to tell you what you have to do after you do the things that you have to do, like get good grades, right? So that's the give and take.
Yeah, definitely. I think we call it first things first.
Yeah, exactly.
You took the classes at the colleges, and did you do programming in high school too?
Yeah. Programming's been something I've done basically ever since I've picked it up. I've not let it go. It's been an ever-present part of my life. I've always been programming, I guess, since I started.
What programs, like what kind of languages did you work with? After you graduated and you got into the real world, like what was the first? I guess when you first like, kind of became like a real developer. I say real developer, I mean like an actual company.
Yeah.
Did it totally change like the way that you were doing stuff? And you're like, well, like everything I know does not work the same way now that I work at a company.
So after AOL, I kind of branched out in two places. One was IRC, and in particular DeviantArt and that kind of community. And then the other was I spent a lot of time on a website called PHP Freaks, and doing the tradition, now what we call the traditional LAMP stack. Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, and building websites. This was what I spent most of high school doing, was building, like messing with HTML, messing with CSS, messing with PHP, learning how to deploy all of this, deploy my own stack, and make different programs there or different utilities there. And then helped people who were on that journey also on a forum called PHP Freaks. And so yeah, like that was the post AOL, and then that all of that work helped me get my first, or I should say all of that activity helped me get my first programming job, or I should say my first job. I don't think I've ever been hired as a developer by any company, but I've developed. I've written codes, at every company I've worked at, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so you said you were never hired for an actual developer role, but you've done lots of programming in those roles. So what
Yeah,
what kind of
yeah.
work did you end up going into?
So I feel like I have one of the coolest jobs in the world. The title is business development, but really what you do is you think about how to combine two technologies together to build something that's more than the sum of its parts. That's the job. And so along with that, there's a lot of prototyping. There's a lot of integration work. There's a lot of writing code to bring two products together, and then trying to envision what and how that might be useful to the overlap of Venn diagram of the two user communities.
So can you give some examples?
So when I first started doing this, was at a company called Docker, which is an open source containerization development tool. And Docker is really interesting because it allows you to take your app and all of its dependencies on a Linux machine, package it up as a container, and then ship those containers around to different places. Whether it's on your laptop, whether it's on a local VM, or a VM running in a cloud. You kind of solve the problem of works on my machine but doesn't work when I'm deploying it, right?
And that was the worst for so many years for system administrators.
Yeah. Exactly. And what's cool about Go, the programming language, is you get a static binary that you can move around and stuff like that. But containers and whatnot, allow you to do that for any programming language, for any stack, for stuff like that. So this was my first open source job. It was my first time in this role of running business development for a company. And so my mandate there was two things. One, anyone and everyone who was building tooling around Docker, to know them, to make sure that their experience using our tool was a good one. And, they had an outlet to ask any questions and stuff like that. A lot of the community building then happened on IRC and on GitHub. And so, for the early days of Docker, this was around 2013, any and all Docker related projects I knew about. So I had a personal relationship with the people who were writing them. And so that there was that part. And then, you work with the big companies who are looking at technology like this, because as you said, like, it used to be a huge problem that application portability was something that was really hard. And so, big companies like Microsoft and IBM and, Red Hat and whatever, we're seeing this momentum that we had built as a company, and we're looking at investing in the project. And so the question was how do they contribute to the open source? How do they, productize this? How do they, use this technology in a way that makes sense to their customer base or to their user base? And so, the job is to do that, like combine the best of both. And one of the cool things that we did was, get Microsoft to bring container technology to Windows. And so that same idea of application portability went from the Linux world to the Windows world. And now, even though you can't run a Linux, well, you can with WSL, but you can't port a Linux binary to Windows and run it natively on Windows. You can build a .NET app and run it on both, et cetera, using container technology to do that. And that was an example of the type of stuff that biz dev people can do.
That's really cool. So
yeah,
when Docker first came out, and I'm going to ask you a history question because I don't know the answer, but was it just like, because I mean, it came from LXC, right? And then there was Docker, but was there a place to run these containers, like an enterprise environment, before like Kubernetes and OpenShift and all that? Because I kind of wasn't it just kind of like Docker for a while, and then the enterprise stuff came, or what happened?
Yeah, so I'll tell a bit of the Docker origin story. Okay, so before Docker was Docker, there was a company called .cloud, and .cloud was a platform as a service, and its main competitor at the time was Heroku. What was cool about Heroku and about .cloud was you had your code. In Heroku's case, it was constrained to Ruby at the time. You had your Ruby code, and you could commit it to a repository, and then Heroku would take care of the rest. It would deploy it for you. It would connect it for you. It would make sure that it was always available. It would page you if there was a problem. Basically, was you as a developer could focus on your app, and them as the experts in deploying could focus on the runtime side of things, right? And so .cloud went through Y Combinator, and the differentiation between .cloud and Heroku was that you could do more languages and more integrations. So you weren't just stuck in Rails. You could bring your PHP along, or you could bring your Python apps along, or you could run specific instances of databases or whatnot. And so we were using container technology to power the platform. So fast forward to the infamous demo of the first version of Docker at a lightning talk at PyCon in March of 2013 by Solomon Hykes, the founder. There he showed a version of Docker that was programmed in Python that could basically, Docker run some containerized app. And, as they say, the rest is history. I entered about 6 weeks after that infamous demo. I, was on IRC. I was talking to everyone on the IRC channel then, and I found out, because Solomon reached out to me, that A, there was a company behind this project, and B, they were in San Francisco, and I lived right nearby. And I was like, cool, I'm coming to visit you guys next week because I'm so passionate and excited about this project. And so, I joined probably 6 weeks after that. To get to your question, at that time, no, there wasn't any Kubernetes. Kubernetes was announced at the first DockerCon in 2014. There wasn't an OpenShift. OpenShift didn't come till much later. Really there was a message, there was a Docker project, and there was the evangelism of the developer community around this new thing, basically. And so, yeah, you just use Docker naked, standalone, to do all of this. All of the first demos were create a little app, run it here locally on my development environment, push it to something like a DigitalOcean or an AWS EC2 instance, install Docker over there, and run it.
Interesting. Okay. And so then Kubernetes came out, and OpenShift later. I don't know. I mentioned open source. And do you remember OpenStack at all?
Yeah, definitely. So OpenStack was what we thought was going to be the first big thing for Docker. Like, oh man, if we can integrate with OpenStack and, in the same way that you manage your VMs from within OpenStack, if you could manage your apps and we could create an app primitive in there, then, we're going to be set up for success. And then the other thing, if we could establish a relationship with Red Hat to remove the objection of, cool tech, but can't actually run it in production because Red Hat won't support it, that would be two major blockers to adoption for the types of customers that would actually pay, as opposed to users who would get excited about using it. And so those were the first two relationships that I built. And Docker was part of one of the headline features of RHEL 7 when Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7 was announced. And a lot of my early days were spent in Hong Kong at the OpenStack conference in Hong Kong. Spent like a month there for that. So that was fun. But, OpenStack basically died, and we were wrong about that. But the concept of app on, VM environments, of cloud environments, certainly kicked off. And now you have AWS services that, host either your containers, or they have AKS, like their Kubernetes, bring your own app and run on their Kubernetes hosted thing, or Google has GKE. Rackspace had a project called Karina, which did the same thing. And Azure has something similar as well.
Interesting. Yeah, except OpenStack, I was in the OpenStack realm for a while. I used to build out OpenStack clouds, and I ended up going to a different job, and super sad to see OpenStack kind of just give out. I'm guessing maybe, I don't know the full reason, but I'm guessing people, I mean, you have to have your own administrators to run a proper OpenStack cloud, right? And there's a lot of like upfront work and maintenance to run your own OpenStack cloud, right? And I think a lot of people just weren't into that. And I don't know. What are your thoughts on it?
There's the hater take. The hater take is it was all vendors and no users. And so, like whenever you have a movement like that, things get slow. You kind of lose sight of, what users actually want, of solving, actual user problems. And instead it's just vendor politics on the different distros and the different people and pieces coming together. So I think that's definitely part of it. And I think the other part, that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is, why run your own cloud when you can just buy one from someone else like Amazon? I think both of those two things at the same time kind of, as a fait accompli or something like that, right?
Yeah. It's got to be the second one a lot. I think, now that I'm thinking about it. It's just so easy, and like the amount of services that like Amazon and Google offer versus they were always playing catch up with OpenStack, right?
Yeah, and there was also Cloud.com, which was a OpenStack competitor, and the people who made Cloud.com ended up making one of the first container distros and container platforms called Rancher Labs. They ultimately sold their company to SUSE, I think a year and a half ago or 2 years ago.
What do you know about Rancher Labs?
I worked there after I left Docker. I worked there for a year or so, and then I went to go work for MariaDB. And then after MariaDB, I took a year and a half or so off, and I started working at my current job called Kentik.
Nice. Do you want to talk about that at all?
If you want to, yeah. We're kind of far away from the AOL topic, but I'll talk about anything if you'd like.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Kentik is really interesting in that it is a product that was born and made for the people who run the internet, and it's kind of like going full circle in a way. So the main customers are customers who own major backbones, or transit, or they sell to service providers who rely on the internet for their business to function, like ISPs or like gaming companies or like Salesforce or Dropbox or Box or basically any service provider that relies on the internet to function, right? And what they do is they monitor all of your internet traffic, all of your network traffic. If you have an issue with your CDN, or you have capacity planning problems, or you have link congestion because of the way that traffic is flowing through your system, then the technology here will alert you to that fact or let you see that fact, and then help you resolve it. And so the company's been alive for 7 years. I've worked there since basically a week before the world shut down because of COVID. It's so cool to work for a company that's so foundational to the performance of the internet as a whole. And one of the interesting challenges that I'm working on is how do you bring that same level of visibility to, more on the operator side, more on the developer, site reliability engineer, DevOps sort of crowd. Because if you think about it, a modern application is basically powered by the network, right? And if you have problems on the network, then your application doesn't really function so well. And so having some visibility there, I think, is critical to the success of the reliability of and reachability of your application at the end of the day. So yeah, that's what I'm working on these days.
That's super cool. So you could have if you think about APM, like application performance management, and you have something that's kind of calling home, right? But you don't want to call home to your direct servers, because if there's a problem with a path to where your actual application is hosted, then it's going to fail. So it's got to be a separate path, right? Maybe to Kentik servers, right? And then from there, Kentik can say there's a problem with the path or something. Is that what the idea is, or?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a couple of things, right? One is, if you think about traditional APM, it's amazing. It can tell you a lot of things about your application. And in some cases, they can also tell you about the environment in which your application is running. So APM meets, host infrastructure monitoring, right? So you can see, this machine has this much CPU, has this much RAM. These processes are using that much. There's a latency, of X amount of milliseconds in this function. This function calls that function. If you have an issue related to a code change, then tools like New Relic or Datadog can point you to the line of code that's being affected, right? Or if you've instrumented with logs and tracing, then tools like Honeycomb or Splunk or Elastic can or Grafana can point you to traces that are taking too long or something like that. So there's a couple of pitfalls to this, right? One is you're only as good as the visibility that you have is only as good as the servers that you have instrumented, right? So if you have your app instrumented on server A, but you don't have it on server B, then you're blind on server B, right? But what happens if you have server B that can't be instrumented because it's not hosted by you. It's hosted by someone else. Or say there's a hop between you and server B. So like that, the first example is like, say I'm using hosted Amazon RDS as a database, as opposed to running my own Postgres, right, on server B. Or what if you have like a load balancer, like a ingress controller, or typical load balancer that you don't want instrumented for whatever reason between server A and server B, right? Well, in traditional APM, you would see server A and server B are up in green, like because the servers are up, but maybe you make a change to the load balancer that makes it so that A can no longer route to B, as an example. That's a class of problem that if you don't have network visibility, then you're not going to be able to, understand that a change was made to the load balancer. And now, even though A and B appear to be up, they can't actually talk together. So your application doesn't actually function. So you may notice that in terms of like a drop off in users, or rise in errors, or some other means. But then you have to investigate why that's happening. Whereas if you just use something like network monitoring, then you could actually see that this link is now broken.
Yeah, is that with there's like synthetic testing. Is that like you have like agents or something server side that make calls? Because I think like Datadog has like a TCP connect test or something like that, where you would tell it to check, is this port open, right, like on the database server. But does it go a step further than that?
Yeah, so synthetic tests are great for a certain class of problem, right? So there's two types really of synthetics tests. One is reachability, like can my app get reached? Is it reachable from, local? Is it reachable from outside of local, from the internet? And then what is the performance of that if I'm using it in San Francisco versus London versus South Africa versus Australia, right? Like if you're a company that cares about user experience, then you're likely going to, have some of your assets on a CDN. Or if you're a company like Facebook, you want to have local versions of your app running in all of those places so that latency is low, right? And so part of this is understanding the reliability of your connection, from location A to endpoint B. And then there's the usability side of things, right? Which is, okay, I can reach my application and performance is okay from there, but can I log in? Can I, if I'm an e-commerce site, can I add stuff to the shopping cart? And can I check out from the shopping cart using some dummy data or something like that, right? And so one is like a more transactional thing, what the industry calls a transaction test, where you go through a series of steps. And the other is more of like, is my application reachable? And what's missing there is all of the interconnected dependencies, right? Like say a modern application is built out of a number of microservices, right? So can all of the microservices talk to each other? Can your app talk to the API gateway? Can your, so where Datadog falls down is, across those scenarios. They have answers to some of it, but not all of it.
Last I checked their synthetic tests, you could like only run from other AWS data centers, which isn't super helpful in some scenarios. So you want to be able to deploy those, wherever you want to, right? But if an upstream internet provider, let's say Philadelphia, for example, is down, then your customers in Philadelphia can't get to your website. But you wouldn't know that.
Exactly.
With Datadog, not to pick on Datadog, but just as an example.
Yes, exactly. And so there's other companies in this space like Catchpoint and Thousand Eyes, which solve, again, different levels or different scenarios inside of the ones that I just described. And what's interesting is that the users of these tools are traditional network engineers, and the surfacing of this to this class of problem and this type of problem to the rest of the infrastructure team, and then to the development team who care about things like reliability and all of that, hasn't really been as pervasive. And so, that's one of the things that I'm working on now, is how to craft a message so that, people get the value in, understanding that they're blind without having some view of what's happening on the network. And actually a convergence of APM and NPM is the future of the space, I think.
Yeah, definitely. In another life, I was doing APM with App Dynamics and then using Thousand Eyes, and I was using both at the same time to try to keep a site up. And then we'd hear, oh, the East Coast can't get to the website, and right. And so when you hear something like that, that's all you have to go on is the East Coast can't get to our website. You have to look at look at your tools and figure out what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
But it sucks when you're reactive and you're being told that as opposed to already knowing it, right?
What's cool about Kentik in particular, and then I'll get off the subject, is if you got a question like that, you'd be able to answer it in a second. You'd know exactly what was misconfigured to make sure, to know, why traffic isn't coming out from the east. It would be evident. It's like link congestion. It's like, my edge router that services, that is down, or my peer is down, or something like that. It would be able to tell you instantly.
Yeah, well, level 3's down, so whatever.
Yes, exactly. And so, it would tell you that, and then, you could either route around it by announcing some changes, take level 3 out of the equation, or, whatever you would want to do to mitigate that, right? Or level 3 is under a DDoS attack, and so, we have to route around it because of that, or latency's high, or, whatever.
That's super cool. Awesome, man. Well, is there anything else you want to cover today?
You asked me if my Apple password is really 128 characters. Yes, it is.
Oh yeah, I did. What's up with that, man? Is that true? Because I was looking at your Twitter, you're complaining about it on Twitter. You're like, I can't believe I had to put in my Apple password, and it's 128 characters. So I noticed this, because you have put in so many times.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, long passwords are good, right? So yeah, but the whole experience of signing up a new device in the Apple ecosystem is really the worst. You have to enter the stuff manually a whole bunch of times before it actually works. And so I think I counted 6 times that I had to enter my password from a new device to getting authenticated and as a part of the Apple ecosystem. And so when you have a complicated password, it doesn't even matter if it's 128 characters, but if you're using different symbols and shift and symbols and lowercase and uppercase, it's a bear. Just getting one password installed requires you to sign into your Apple account, requires you to go into the store and authenticate there. It requires you to then get one password installed. I don't know, it was the worst. So
I mean, I can understand a long password for one password, right? For example, right? Then it'll take a very long time to crack that. That's your master password. But with the multi-factor with Apple, it's pretty good. I'm just so curious. I mean, how come you stuck with the 128? I don't know how many years have you had the 128 password?
I don't know. It's just my default policy when I generate a password with one password to be that long.
Oh, one password generated it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought you decided on your own. I'm just gonna have 128. I'm gonna make up my 128 password.
No.
And you had it memorized or something. I'm like, okay.
I don't I just, yeah, I have it default to 128 characters for every password, and then if there's a website that complains for that, then I drop down to 64 or 32, basically.
That's great. You're going to be one of the last accounts to get cracked then, right? I mean, if you think about it, there's a database dump.
Yeah, but on the places where you get cracked because of a database dump or something like that, it's because they didn't salt the password or whatever, and they stored it in plain text. And so, that's no matter what my password is in that case, it's out there. So anyway.
Yeah, very, very true.
I don't know. This was fun. Thank you so much for A, inviting me, B, for finding my code. It means a lot. I used to be able to find it on the internet, and I thought, when I care, I'll download it. And then all of a sudden it disappeared.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad I could find it. And instead of a finder's fee, I'm glad you came on here instead. So I appreciate it.
Yeah. Also happy still to do the finder's fee. I'm a man of my word. So.
All right, man. Well, have a good one. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Welcome to cyberspace.